Welcome back to the Cheap Air Gunner channel. This is Cherokee Steve. We're going to be moving on now that we did our modifications to the valve assembly and its parts. The next logical step in the path of the airflow out of the valve housing is the transfer port. Now that rubber seal that goes on the bottom portion of it, I've removed that. Little piece, when I caliper up the inner diameter of the transfer port, it checks approximately 0.141, 141 thousandths in diameter. I don't remember where I read it, but I know that I did. I believe it was probably somewhere on the Gateway to Air Guns forum, but that a good number to shoot for when you're opening up ports is 70% of the diameter of the barrel. In this case, the diameter of the barrel is 0.22. And figuring out the 70% of that and subtracting it from the 0.22, we get approximately 0.157. So that's what we're shooting for as far as opening up this transfer port. We would like to open it up from 141 to 157. Now, I've done this before with the transfer port on my 2289 backpacker, and what I can get away with, you're going to want to use your cordless drill. This particular drill is 141 in diameter. So the transfer port itself fits onto the drill. As you can see, here's the transfer port. What I'm going to do is hold on to the transfer port. I'm going to work the drill back and forth, moving it around, kind of rotating it and putting pressure off to the right, to the left, up, and down. And that constant pressure in the cutting edges of the flute of the drill will start to remove material. You'll see it on your fingers. Be careful on your grip. Make sure if something does catch and that transfer port starts to spin, let go right away. But we're just going to do that. Work it back and forth, around, you're going to keep doing, will remove material. I promise you. I've already got some of it on my fingers. But it takes a while. Make sure you got a well-charged battery for your drill. Actually, the diameter of the idea of the transfer port, just from the little bit that I've done, it's now checking 143. So I've removed a couple of thousandths. So I'm going to keep doing that over and over. And what I worked my way up to is this drill, which is 157 in diameter. I've ground the sides of the cutting edges of the flute to a smaller diameter, so it kind of acts as a step drill. So at the very end, it's checking about 145 in diameter, and it works its way up to the full diameter of the drill. which is 157. So once we keep working that 141 diameter drill back through the transfer port, back and forth and around and around and around, and start to get material removed from the inside, I tend to want to shoot to get this opened up to about 147. At that particular point, I come back with that second drill. The tip of it will fit at that point, but basically do the same thing. Now this, you just want to stick whatever portion of the tip of the drill is going to fit in the transfer port. And apply slight pressure. Normally what I have to do at some point as I start to work from the tip of the ground down drill up to the full diameter of the drill is I will have to take my channel locks and hold on to the outside of this. I can't get a good enough grip with my fingers. And here it's just really getting a feel for having your channel locks gripping the transfer port tight enough so it's not going to spin, and you can work that 157 drill all the way through and yet not crush the transfer port. If it does start to spin, don't freak out, don't worry too much, because if you do, mark up the fattest portion of the outside of the transfer port. If you do start to mark up this area here, that really is just a reinforcement for the middle of the transfer port. Doesn't make contact with anything. It takes up the space between the valve and the barrel port. The turn down ends kind of sit down inside the valve port itself. The top portion of the transfer port sits inside. You'll notice the port on the barrel has a very large chamfer on it, and the top portion of the transfer port sits inside that chamfer. So that gap in between the barrel and the valve itself is where this fattest portion of the transfer port is going to be. So if that gets scratched up and marked up on the outside, it's not that big of a deal. Just be careful, because it's going to want to spin, especially when that larger 157 drill starts to make its way through. What I have is another transfer port that I've been working on with the two drills, and this particular one as you can see, it will fit on my 157 drill. I've already worked this back and forth with the smaller drill, working my way up to this particular drill. This particular step drill that I made, my homemade step drill. So, And it is scratched up on the outside of that fatter part of the transfer port, but I'm not really worried about that for the reasons I just explained. A good idea after you get done doing this. Um, my flat aluminum block that I have, with a piece of some sandpaper, but work the ends, flat sand them. We're just looking to smooth them out and not necessarily remove material or that much material. Because the edges of the transfer port will get a little bit chewed up from the drill. So we're just looking to smooth it. Okay, I like that. So the point of this is we've increased the amount of air that's going to be flowing out of the valve with our valve modifications. We've smoothed out the exit path for the air, and we don't want to, at this point, bottleneck that increased volume of air flowing out of the valve with a less than optimal diameter on our transfer port. So that's the purpose behind opening up the transfer port. Now, what we want to equal in diameter is the port in the barrel itself. And there you can see the port. But checking that with calipers, that even checks smaller. I'm getting 135 for the diameter of the port inside the barrel. So we can go through the same steps that we took with the transfer port, starting with the smaller drill, our 141. This is the part I was referring to as far as having various size dowel rods. We want one that's small enough to fit inside the barrel. When we go through with the drill, we want to avoid hitting the back side of the rifle barrel, nicking it up. All that, if we nick it up and we gouge it up, we really run the risk of damaging our pellet as it feeds into the barrel and just past the barrel port. This one's too big. That's a 187 diameter dowel rod. But that's going to go inside the barrel. Protecting the back side of the barrel that's across from the barrel port. Let the drill do the work. Don't put so much pressure on it. The drill will want to follow the hole that's already in the barrel. It won't want to walk as much as if you're forcing it through. So let the drill do the work. Very slight pressure is all you need. Now, as I've been working this and I've been drilling into the dowel rod, I'm going to show you. I've been drilling into the dowel rod, so I want to move that so that I don't risk keep drilling into the same particular spot in the dowel rod, drill through the dowel rod, and hit the back side of the barrel. So I'm just going to move that down a little bit farther. I'm going to cheat a little bit here. You're going to want to work your 157 drill all the way through. What I have here is a 157 and 5 carbide end mill. Now it has 4 cutting edges as opposed to the 2 that the drill has. This really cuts down on the burrs that are going to be on the back side of that barrel port by the time I get through. You probably don't have access to this. That's okay. A drill works just fine. This is just going to speed up the process. And of course, throughout this, with all the different size drills and the end mill, if in my case, you want to keep, as straight as you possibly can. Keep a right angle between your tool and the barrel itself. Again, I'm letting the tool do the work. Very slight pressure. What I'm starting to see is an indentation in the dowel rod itself from the end mill. That's a pretty good indication that I can stop.
I will be doing a thorough cleaning of the barrel before assembling the gun back together.
Yep, I'm getting 157 on the diameter of the barrel port. So, now we've got to deburr. There's going to be burrs from the breakthrough inside the barrel where the tools broke through the barrel port into the inner diameter of the barrel. One of the tools I have here, if you get a deburring knife kit, hopefully you can find one that has a blade like this one. It's called a hook scraper. But this comes in really handy. Because it's going to go up through the barrel, and then as it rotates and spins around, it's going to do a nice deburring job along the ID of the barrel where that port is. It's not going to take much. What I like to do in my needle file set, which I utilized a needle file for taking a gouged piece of material off the outer diameter of the valve. If you remember in the last video, I've taken one and broken it off close to the handle portion, and ground, put a nice rounded edge on the file end of the needle file, the shorter, I've pretty much made it a short file. This is kind of oval in shape. It's not a flat file, it's got a radius to it. And from the back side of the barrel, where the port is, I'm going to very lightly work this back and forth over the barrel port, the inside of the barrel, where the port is. This is just a secondary precaution to smooth out and get any burrs that I may have missed with the hook scraper. Very lightly. Then I'm going to take my 187 dowel rod. I'm going to put it inside the barrel and try to get it to stop just short. But I'm going to put all the pressure. I've got the port facing up here, so I'm going to put all the pressure of this wooden dowel rod up so that it scrapes against the inside of this barrel port, and I'm feeling for any type of hang up with the wooden dowel rod, which would indicate that there's some burrs that I've missed. I don't have to worry about marking or scratching up or ruining any of the rifling with the wooden dowel. It's not going to do anything, and I'm not feeling any kind of hang up. It's just a smooth transition. So I think we're good. We could test fit our transfer port. Now, because we opened up the port, that large chamfer that was on there is not as large as it used to be. The outside diameter of the transfer port that fits inside the port of the barrel is about 0.178 diameter. What I'm noticing is I dry fit the transfer port against the barrel port. Is that it fits all the way in because of that chamfer. It actually sits on the larger midsection of the transfer port. That's what's sitting against the barrel port. So, what I would like to do is come up with something that creates a nice seal between the top ledge of this fatter part that's going to be sitting against the barrel and the barrel itself. How do we go about doing that? Well, it's basically going to do the same thing that the seal that goes on the other end that faces the valve port is going to do. But as far as what comes with the transfer port stock, there is nothing like this seal that goes on the bottom portion that faces the valve. You may have heard of a modification. It's called the Bic lighter O-ring. If you go on forums, it's kind of well spoken of out there. The thing is, in my trials and errors, what I've come across is when you dismantle a Bic lighter, it doesn't have an O-ring inside of it. But what I'm assuming has happened is Bic lighter has become synonymous with disposable lighter. And what I have found is that there are disposable lighters out there that do have an O-ring. This is an example of one. It is not a Bic lighter. It is a disposable lighter. It can be completely disassembled, and down here there's a little exhaust port, and there's a piece inside of here that has a very small, tiny O-ring. I've already dismantled a couple of these lighters and have a couple of those O-rings. If you give me a second, I'm going to try to clean up and put some stuff away that we've been using. Okay, just to give you a little bit more information, the brand name that's stamped into the metal portion of this lighter is Super Light. Light spelled L-I-T-E, but that's the brand name of this particular lighter. They happen to have these at a gas station close to my work. I just took a chance. I bought one, disassembled it, found the O-ring inside of here, went back to the gas station and bought a few more lighters specifically for the O-ring that was inside of them. But inside this little plastic container, I have a couple of them. They're really small. I'm going to put it on this wooden end, this was the wooden end of the Q-tip, but if you could see it on there, it's extremely small in diameter. It's extremely small in thickness as well, but it makes a great seal on that side of the transfer port that faces the barrel port. Now that particular side of the transfer port does not stick up that high. It's very small, and what it really makes it a challenge to get this O-ring on there and keep it on there. I managed to get it on. This is what the transfer port assembly is going to look like. On the shorter end, you've got that wide, larger diameter in the middle of the outside of the transfer port. On the shorter side that faces up into the barrel port, I've got that tiny O-ring on there, and I'll explain how I did that in just a second. And then the stock seal that goes on the longer end of the transfer port that faces the valve port. That's going to give us a nice seal both top and bottom of the transfer port. It is not an easy thing to get that little tiny O-ring onto the top portion of the transfer port, but it can be done. And I was trying to remember, I knew there was some trick I used when I was installing that on the transfer port I have on my 2289 backpacker. Basically, that 157 drill I was using to open up the ID of the transfer port. On the smooth, non-fluted shank end of the drill, you get the small, this is the other small O-ring I have, but you get that on and over the end, the smooth end of the drill. So that it looks like this. Then you put the end, the smooth end of the drill right up against, or if you can, into the ID of the side of the transfer port that you want the O-ring to go on. And as you slide the O-ring down off of the drill shank and onto the OD of the transfer port. That's what I found worked. Do not sit there with something that is this tiny and try to stretch it out over the OD of the transfer port with your fingers. It's just not going to work, at least with my fingers. They're too fat. So the transfer port is opened up. We did the little O-ring modification, the disposable lighter O-ring modification on the side of the transfer port that's going to go into the barrel. We've replaced the seal on the opposite end of the transfer port that's going to sit on top of the valve. We've opened up our barrel port and deburred the inside of it. So we have a 157 pathway out of the valve, through the transfer port, and into the barrel. This is going to help utilize all of that extra air that we have and are going to get with extra pumping into the valve, into the barrel as efficiently as it can be. So I'm getting very close to the point of being able to reassemble this gun. As far as power modifications, it's complete. The transfer port, opening up the transfer port and the barrel port is the final steps of the power modifications. There's a couple of more modifications I'm going to be doing that are going to be reinforcing and strengthening certain aspects of the gun and certain attachment points of a couple of different parts. I don't want to spoil anything. One of the things is a definite upgrade from a stock part, but I'll get to that in the next video, okay? Power mods are done. This last part was the transfer port and the barrel port, okay? Thanks for checking in. Stick with me and we'll get this gun back together as soon as I possibly can. I promise you, okay? Thanks for stopping by. Stay safe, shoot safe. Take care.